All right, so with that, it is time for the main show of our program, and I want to welcome Louise Sams to the screen, who's going to be our fireside chat. Louise, great to see you, and you certainly need no introduction. You're just a great member of our club, but by quick intro, certainly you had a long career with Turner Broadcasting Systems, General Counsel, most recently, but headed as president of the international operations there, and serve on several public company boards. I know you're keeping busy since retiring from TBS, and you're chair of the board of trustees at Princeton University. So you've got a lot going on. I'm sure you'll be getting on many planes at some point in the coming year. So Louise, thanks for organizing our talk today, and I turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to be here. And it is my privilege to introduce Carol Tomé to the club, who is the CEO of UPS. She's the 12th CEO in the 114 year history of the company. I think many of you know that before becoming CEO at UPS, Carol served as the executive vice president and CFO of the Home Depot, which we are all familiar with, another great Atlanta company. Carol joined Home Depot in 1995 as vice president and treasurer. Carol began her career as a commercial lender with United Bank of Denver, which is now part of Wells Fargo, and then spent several years as director of banking for Johns Mansfield Corporation. And prior to joining the Home Depot, Carol was vice president and treasurer of Riverwood International Corporation. I think many of us know Carol through not only her work as a business leader in Atlanta and United States, but also her giving back. And that's how I got to know Carol, through her nonprofit work and through some of the work that she has done with civic organizations. And currently, Carol serves as a trustee or board member for a number of organizations, including Grady Hospital Foundation, Atlanta Botanical Gardens, Sovos Brands, Catalyst, and GIA Partners. Carol is also a member of the Committee of 200, the Buckhead Coalition, the Business Roundtable, and the Business Council. And Carol's a native of Jackson, Wyoming. She holds a bachelor's degree in communications from the University of Wyoming and a master's degree in finance from the University of Denver. So welcome, Carol.
Well, Louise, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, we really appreciate you taking the time. And so let me just start out. I mean, it was a pretty monumental event when you were appointed the first female CEO at UPS. Many of your predecessors were from inside UPS, and you were not. And I have to note that you're one of, I think, 3 women leading a Fortune 50 company. So what do you think that UPS was looking for in a new CEO? Certainly, we all know that you brought shareholder value to the Home Depot, but what are some of the other things you think that they were looking for in a new CEO?
Well, I'll tell you the journey that brought me here. As you know, I had retired. I was on my farm in the northwest part of the state and working on my family foundation, and had joined a few corporate boards. So I hadn't planned on this being my next calling, but I'm delighted that it became my next calling. The way I got here is simply this. As David Abney, and many of you know David Abney, as he was getting ready to retire, the board created a persona of the experiences and skills that they thought the next CEOs should possess. And they took that persona and matched it up against the executive leadership team here at UPS. And we've got a terrific executive leadership team. But no one was quite ready. No one didn't fit the persona that the board was looking for. So they said, you know what, we think we should go to the outside. And they came to me and they said, we'd like you to be considered. And I'm like, me? I'm retired. I'm 62 at the time. I'm like, really? You don't think I'm too old? They're like, no, we don't think so. We think you actually possess what we're looking for. And I'm like, all right, well, what is that? And there were a few things that really resonated with me. One was to keep the values of our culture alive. And I'm very much a believer that culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's something that Peter Drucker said. So I'm like, I get that. I get the importance of values. It is our culture. And I understood the values of the company because I had been on the board since 2003. So that was really important as they thought about the next CEO. They also wanted someone who had more digital fluency, who understood what was happening to commerce. And at Home Depot, I certainly had an experience with consumers moving away from shopping in stores to an online experience. And Amazon, oh, by the way, is UPS's largest customer. So they wanted someone who understood that, someone who had a global experience base, which I had, and someone who really loved to develop people. And I love to develop people. In fact, when I think about my days at Home Depot, the things I'm most proud of are the impact that I had on people. So when they said, this is what we're looking for, and we really don't want to have to go to the outside again, Carol, so we really want you to develop the next CEO, I'm like, wow, I have an opportunity to bring digital fluency to the company, an opportunity to create value, an opportunity to develop people. Doesn't this sound like the right job for me? And Louise, I went to Ramon, whom you know, my husband Ramon. I'm like, well, what do you think? And he's like, would you please go back to work? You're driving me crazy. So I'm like, all right, he's on board. I think this is the right next step for me. So I was really honored and delighted and just so very pleased to join the company a year ago now.
Well, great. So you talk about UPS being a values-based company, but and that's part of the culture. But is this a culture shift too, or an opportunity for a culture shift at UPS with your leadership?
I think, like many older companies, we are reinventing ourselves in a way. We're holding true to the core values that Jim Casey instilled in us now almost 114 years ago. But we are reinventing ourselves because we need to. If you think about the employee of the future, and we're 540,000 UPSers strong. If you think about the employee of the future, what are they looking for? Well, they're looking for an environment where they can bring their authentic self to work. And I have to tell you, we had a lot of rules and regulations that got in the way of bringing your authentic self to work. For example, we used to prohibit facial hair or natural hair. So if you're African American, you might have a fro or braid or twist. That wasn't allowed. Tattoos. We had a more restrictive policy regarding tattoos than the Army. Last year, we changed our appearance policy, so we allowed facial hair and natural hair. And today, we announced a new tattoo policy, which I'm super excited about. So we're keeping our core values, but we're reinventing ourselves to lean into the future and be the employer of choice for the future.
So you can now show all your tattoos, Carol, without violating company policy?
For the most part, we still don't allow facial tattoos.
Okay.
And tattoos. But imagine if you have a leg tattoo or an arm tattoo, and it's 100 degrees outside and you're delivering packages. Our men and women who have tattoos, well, they'd have to cover them up. So this is a much more comfortable environment for so many of our people than it had been. And clearly, of course, if the tattoo would offend you, that would be not allowed.
Right. Well, so Carol, one thing that you've talked about as CEO of UPS is that diversity, inclusivity, equity, those are values of the company. And, you know, I think so many of us know sort of the business case for diversity in the workforce, but I think it is helpful to have someone in a position like yours to remind us of the business case.
Well, there's been a lot of research that shows companies who have diverse leadership teams and diverse boards, well, they outperform from a total shareholder return perspective. An interesting study by McKinsey, which I find to be fascinating, said that if men and women were represented equally, the global economy would grow by something like $28 trillion. It would grow the economy by 26%. Those statistics are, mind-boggling, but real. So you can't really argue about the business case.
So we know the business case, but we also know that we've been talking about this for some time.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to say that, for the last 20 years that I was at Turner, we were talking about this, but we didn't always see that move the needle. So can you talk about some initiatives that you've got going on at UPS where you feel as though you're making some progress?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's all about intentionality. So it started with our board of directors. We had several directors who were leaving us because of other age requirements. We have a retirement age on our board. So we had directors leaving us because they were going to age out, or we had directors leaving us because they had taken on big jobs and could no longer serve. So I knew that I had an opportunity to build or rebuild the board. And since I joined now a year ago, added 5 new members to our board, including 3 women, 1 an Asian woman, and 2 African-American men. So we now have 3 African-American men on our board and 6 women. We have 2 retirements coming up in May. So when we're done, we'll have 4 white men on our board. So we'll have one of the most diverse boards in corporate America from a gender and ethnicity perspective. But there was more to it. We also dropped the average age. And that was critically important because Internet of Things, technology is eating the world. We need people on our board who are more contemporary and comfortable in that space. So it was very intentional at the board. Then on my leadership team, a lot of intentionality there as well. The first promotion I made was to promote Laura Lane into our Chief Communications and Public Affairs and Community Affairs role, bringing all those groups together under one awesome leader. So she joined our executive leadership team. I then went to the outside and brought in Daryl Ford to be our Chief Human Relations Officer. He's an African-American man who's taken that CHR role. And I took Charlene Thomas, who had been our CHR role, and I put her in a new Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion role, reporting directly to me. Many of our companies have Chief Diversity Officers, but they don't necessarily report into the CEO. Oftentimes they're tucked under an HR leader or tucked someplace in the organization, but Charlene is a direct report to me. So very diverse executive leadership team. And as we talk about talent broadly, we talk about the need to have diversity. And not just diverse slates of candidates when you go about selecting jobs, but also being intentional about diversity amongst our leaders. And we are setting new goals. We haven't publicly come out with those goals, but we're setting new goals. We'll be releasing our EEOC data for the first time. It's been asked by our shareholders for the past number of years. I'm like, we have nothing to hide. We're a diverse organization. Let's share the data and then provide some additional color about what we're doing with our team.
And would you think about tying compensation at certain levels to reaching some of those diversity goals? Do you think that is a good tool to use?
It might be. We haven't landed on that. We do tie compensation to total shareholder return. So a byproduct of great diversity is total shareholder return. So maybe we don't need to have the diversity stats. I haven't really thought through that all the way, quite candidly, Louise, but I'm not ruling it out either.
Yeah. Okay. So along with talking about diversity and inclusion, I mean, you've also talked about social justice. And I know that in June, UPS announced that it would invest in institutions that promote education, equity, social justice, I think $4 million or something like that. So what do you say to people who think that CEOs should just worry about shareholder returns and shouldn't walk into social issues or maybe political issues?
Yeah, so, I've been around for a while, and I used to believe that what Milton Friedman said, that the duty of the corporation is to create value for the shareholders. But my point of view has evolved over time, that actually we do have an obligation to attend to the needs of all stakeholders. which means we have to address social issues. Because the paradox is, if you take care of the needs or attend to the needs of all stakeholders, you actually do create value for your shareholder. So, I took this CEO job on June 1st. I onboarded back in March, but I actually took the job on June 1st. And I think I shared this story with you, but I had put together a video to say hello to the UPSers around the world. And we had taped it in advance because it needed to be translated into all the various languages in which we operate around the globe. So the video had been taped several weeks in advance of that June 1st airing. And then the George Floyd killing happened. And I sat down on my kitchen table with, tears flowing down my face because I was ashamed and angry and upset. And I'm like, I can't run this video. I got to tell people how I really feel. So I penned a note to go out to all UPSers. And that note ran before the video. And then we did come out right after that with public statements about actions that we would take, turning our anger into action by living our values. And I think and there were a number of actions that we mentioned, including funding Black organizations and committing volunteer hours and creating an equity and justice task force and a number of other things, unconscious bias training for all of our people, lots of actions that we took. And for CEOs, I think if you let your values drive you, you'll come to the right decision. Mm-hmm. And that's what it comes down to. It's easy maybe to say nothing, but it's not the right thing to do. And if you let your values direct you, you'll do the right thing.
So I think that leads us to the obvious topic of the Georgia voting law. And certainly we've all seen that we've got CEOs, specifically Delta and Coca-Cola CEOs, making statements last year, which one side because they were speaking out against the law after the law had been passed. They got crucified on the other side because I think somebody called them woke corporate hypocrites. Now, I know that UPS has a statement on its website that basically says that you believe that voting laws and legislation should make it easier, not harder, for Americans to exercise their right to vote. But without mention specifically of the Georgia law. So what do you think you should be saying about the Georgia law or not saying? Again, you've got to deal with shareholders, customers, politicians, employees. How do you deal with a topic like this right here, right now?
Well, philosophically, I've always liked to fly under the radar when it comes to politics, and especially bipartisan. Or partisan politics, I should say. In this case, though, this is a human capital matter that faces the nation, not just the state of Georgia. Remember, we have operations in all 50 states. Mm-hmm. We deliver packages in 220 countries and territories around the globe. So this just isn't an issue for Georgia. So our statement is what we believe, that it should be easier to vote, not harder to vote, across the nation, across the world. And we will take those words and put them into actions. And we listed a number of things that we are doing here in this country to help voter accessibility and polling availability.
Do you think that companies can get politicians to begin to talk to each other? I mean, I think what we are all experiencing is just this polarization in the country, and it really interferes with getting things done. What do you think companies can do to sort of urge politicians to learn to compromise again?
Well, we need to put our best foot forward and do our best in talking to all parties and listening. And there was some great commentary at the beginning of your program today about the need to listen, the need to get get comfortable in those uncomfortable discussions that we must have, but start by listening and lead with empathy before opinion.
Mm-hmm. Do you think your employees today, as compared to the employees of, say, Home Depot 20 years ago, expect companies to be more activists?
Well, that's my experience. Now, I've just been in this job for, a year, let's call it. And that's my experience, is that our employees are expecting us to be louder, more vocal, and actually grateful when we are.
Mm-hmm. So, Carol, people talk a lot about authentic leadership. What does that mean to you?
It's just bringing your whole self to the job every day. You know, we were chatting about this. Louise, you and I started a while ago, right? And I can remember my first job. I had to wear these broadcloth button-down shirts with a silk bow tie and a striped suit, and I couldn't wear pants. And I'm like, this is just not who I am at all. And we had to go out every Friday with our boss and smoke cigarettes and drink scotch. And I'm like, this is just not who I am. So I decided to kind of break out of that and create my own way, bring my own authentic self to work. And what happened is people started to know me for me and not me for the person who I thought they wanted me to be. And it worked really, really well. So I always encourage people to bring their authentic self to work.
You know, there's a theory that women have a harder time in leadership roles bringing their authentic self to work because the role models that they've had, particularly at the highest levels of companies, have always been men. And so they don't really know how to make that adjustment. Do you think that's the case, or why do you think that's the case?
I think that might have been the case, but things are changing. They really are changing. Mm-hmm. You know, I wear leather jackets to work and people are like, you're wearing a leather jacket. I'm like, yeah, can we? I'm like, absolutely. So it's like when you have more women in leadership roles, maybe that's why it's starting to change, because there are more of us. Yeah. We're still a minority. We are, but there are more of us than there were. And that helps, I think, just push that into the closet.
Mm-hmm. Do you, from your experience, do you think that men and women lead differently?
Sometimes I do, in that women are very nurturing because they're moms. And I think they lead more with empathy than men sometimes, but I know very empathetic men as well. A lot of it has to do with how they were raised, how they were mentored, how they were coached, groomed, and the expectations that were put on them by their bosses.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed, just in terms of the increasing diversity, for example, on the UPS board, have you noticed the way does it work differently because it's more diverse?
Yeah, but it's not so much a gender or ethnicity, it's diverse of experience. That's fantastic. Because you've got people around the table who are just bringing different ideas from their work vantage point or their life vantage point. It makes the conversation so much better, deeper, more thoughtful, more thought-provoking. And as a CEO, that's what you really want. You want your board to kind of make it think. I love that. Yeah.
I'm curious, and I think I know the answer to this question, but I have to ask it. Do you feel more pressure to succeed because you are a woman in a position where there are very few women?
Absolutely not. No. And no gender pressure here at all. I just got to do a good job. I'm doing my darndest to do a good job here.
Carol, given that you've got 540,000 employees all over the globe, one, how do you reach them, and how do you get sort of the values and the culture, particularly if you want to change it a bit, that message out to them, and particularly now during COVID when you can't go travel and see them?
Well, that's the truth. When I onboarded a year ago, I thought I'd be spending my time traveling around the world, shaking people's hands, walking our facilities, meeting our customers. I had these grandiose plans that didn't happen. So I'm like, all right, how am I going to do this? And thank goodness for Zoom and technology. So I've been able to have some really intimate conversations with people around the world via Zoom. And I've found actually they're much more meaningful than that glad-hatting experience would have been had I been traveling around the world. So I do a lot of skip level meetings, listening, ask a lot of questions, and I listen. I don't talk very much. I listen. Then I do a monthly video that goes out to the world, and it's on things that are wildly important to me. The one I just taped last week was on mental health. That's wildly important to me, that people are taking care of themselves. Many of us are still working from home or working remotely, but most of our UPSers are getting up every day, putting on their uniform, and they're sorting and delivering packages, or they're flying aircraft around the world. They've put themselves in harm's way. They've put their families in harm's way. They've gone through a lot. They are essential workers who were faced with unprecedented demand. So they've been working really, really hard, and they're delivering vaccines. So I just want to make sure that everybody's mental health is, where it needs to be. So I talked about that. And that's one way to connect to people. We have basically a way that our UPSers can talk back through upsers.com. And I read every posting on upsers.com. So I hear what our UPSers are saying. If a UPSer sends me an email or a text, I immediately respond. It's the most important message I get or communication I have. And it's pretty interesting because this is a little bit of a change. People say to me in their text or their email, I doubt you'll ever see this. Well, nobody ever screens my emails, so I do see it. And then they say, and I doubt that you'll respond. So when I respond, it's just like, whoa. But, that's a great way of connecting with people, because whomever is on the other end of that email or that text, they're talking to their colleagues about the communication they just had with the CEO. And I'm sparking that around the company. I'm like, the most important call you get or text you get is one from a UPSer. So I'm instituting something that we had at Home Depot, which I thought was fantastic, which was the Sundown Rule. That by the time the sun goes down, you have answered all your internal emails or texts or phone calls, although people don't use the phone anymore, but you've answered all those because it's the most important one you get.
Wow. I'm wondering when you sleep, Carol, if you're looking at all of those posts from employees and emails. Goodness, that's great though.
Yeah. Well, luckily right now I don't need too much sleep. That's a blessing.
Well, good for you. I am curious, though. I mean, you raise the issue of mental health, for example, and certainly I know that when I ran the international business at Turner, we would sometimes run across cultural issues. It wasn't the culture of the company, it was the culture in the country. And it created some challenges for us. Have you encountered challenges with some of your international employees in terms of them understanding the values that are coming from the company?
Well, we over the years have put a lot of expats into our international operations for a couple of reasons. One, because we're a global integrated network. So leveraging the knowledge of US on a global basis is smart because it is a network. It's not just an individual operation. Two, we wanted to implant our values, if you will. So that was an important part of it. The beauty of it is now many of those expats are coming home, and we're starting to promote people who are actually native to the countries in which they operate, which I think is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. We've always, for example, had an American running our international business. I can't wait for the day where we actually have somebody from outside running our international business. I think that would be very cool. Well, I should take it back. We did have a Canadian run the international, but he didn't really count. He had sort of assimilated into the US. But I'd love to have someone from Asia or Europe running our international business at some point.
Yeah. So I want to take a question from the audience, which relates to diversity and inclusion efforts. And the question is, how are you encouraging your suppliers to support the UPS diversity efforts?
Yes. So we have a supplier diversity group within our procurement organization. So this has been an area of focus for us for a long time. But we're changing it up a bit because we would measure our success based on the percentage of spend with minority-owned businesses or women-owned businesses or businesses that are owned by former members of the military. And that's all well and good. But now we're asking to see the diversity amongst the teams that are supporting us. So if you think about professional services, be it law firms or accounting firms or consulting firms, we're now asking them to bring a diverse slate to our account. And if that slate's not diverse, then we have to have a rethink of that account, because that's what we think is a really powerful way to drive diversity amongst those service providers. And we've had some real success. Norm Brothers, who is our general counsel, started this with the law firms that we work with, and it's really been a home run. So now we're doing it across the board.
Yeah. No, that's great. Carol, you mentioned vaccine distribution and UPS's involvement. Can you say more about that?
We're thrilled to be part of this moment. You may not know this, but we've been in the healthcare logistics business for 15 years. We are a leader in cold chain logistics, and that's really important because, as you know, some of these vaccines, well, they have to be cold, if not frozen. So I'm just so thrilled about our performance here. We're delivering them every day. It's super complicated. If I could just take a second and tell you, or maybe a minute, to tell you how it works. You know, we've got to pick up the vaccines from the manufacturing plant, wherever that plant may be. Then we typically take them to an aircraft, one of our brown tails, and fly them to Worldport, which is our main air hub in Louisville, Kentucky. The vaccines are taken off that aircraft. They are processed. They are labeled with some special labeling technology that's got a battery inside the label, so we never lose that package. They're put onto feeder aircraft and flown to their final destination, where they're taken off that aircraft and put on a package car and delivered to their dosing site. We do that every day within 20 hours. And we do it with 99.9% efficiency. So we're really proud of that. But it's more than that. It's what we're doing from a philanthropic perspective. So we are partnering with Gavi, and we're starting to deliver vaccines from a humanitarian perspective. Recently, this is pretty cool, recently delivered vaccines via drones in Rwanda. So there's some really interesting things happening from a humanitarian perspective as well as the commercial perspective.
That's great. Well, we appreciate that. Certainly, even those of us who've already gotten the vaccine, we want more and more people to get the vaccine. So thank you for that. So Carol, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to the Rotary Club of Atlanta. And I'm sure Cannon wants to say a bit of thanks as well.
Well, I absolutely do. And I have a question or two as usual, but Louise, so well done on organizing. And Carol, thank you. I mean, you've humanized a lot of the values behind a supply chain, right? I mean, you've talked about how just keeping alive the values and integrating them into the business. I loved hearing about your evolution from shareholder to stakeholder, and how that process has evolved in your thinking. It's just fascinating to hear. And just, your commitment and business case to diversity, and whether it's gender, age, ethnicity, all that came through so well. So thank you for those thoughts. I couldn't let you go though without recognizing UPS is in one of the most disruptive businesses around, just like so many industries are facing. And I just, in 1 or 2 minutes, would love to just hear your thoughts on a couple things. I mean, obviously, I'm sure the number one question you get is Amazon friend or foe, right? And in some sense, Netflix is changing the personalized consumer experience, which of course has supply chain ramifications. So maybe could you just take a couple minutes and just share 2 or 3 interesting stories about innovation that you're seeing happen at UPS in response to those kind of forces?
Yeah, the competitors are changing, our customers are changing, and the rate of change is accelerating. What got us here isn't going to get us to where we need to go. So we're leaning into this in a major big way and have declared that we want to have the best digital experience powered by our smart global logistics network, because we do have an end-to-end network, which differentiates us against every other supply chain. You might think, well, isn't FedEx the same as UPS? Not at all, actually. If you are a large e-commerce company like an Amazon or Target or Home Depot, we can drive one truck up to your warehouse and you can put packages on it that are going via aircraft, packages that are going via ground. However the mode of transportation is, we take your packages and then we do all the behind the scenes work. That's very different than the post office and the FedEx, even Amazon supply chain. So our global smart logistics network is part of our secret sauce. But the digital experience, that front end experience, is where we really need to win to continue to separate us from the rest of the pack. So we are leaning into 16 customer journeys to ensure that that digital experience is frictionless and is seamless. And that really matters for our small and medium-sized business customer, a customer that we want to own. And candidly, until last year, we had lost market share in that customer segment for 7 years. But we're leaning into that in a big way. We had the largest percentage growth in that segment in the fourth quarter that we've had in 10 years. And that continues to occur in 2021. So expect to see some really interesting things coming out of us through an innovative perspective. The digital experience is innovative. And then we'll use innovation across our chain through the use of robotics and just so many cool things that we're investing in here to make us a better company.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating future, and would love to, hear again, in the coming years, your thoughts as you help UPS reposition itself, like you said, going from losing market share to winning market share, and doing that with a new mix of business driving it. So fascinating world. Well, thank you, Carol, for sharing your thoughts about just the values you consider important, the best way to integrate them into business, and a little bit about the spirit of innovation. We really enjoyed hearing your thoughts today.
It was my pleasure. And Louise, thank you so much.
Yeah, enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.